So I thought one way to open it, as I mentioned, I'm sure people here in the audience realize that universities are important. I mean, I think one of the most important things is talent, and universities draw in talent from around the world. There's really is a war for talent, and so many of the startups are started by people that, from overseas. I think in Silicon Valley, something like 40% of startups have on their founding team someone who immigrated to the United States. And we know, as again, things like tech transfer or holding competitions, holding conferences, doing some consulting work. But I thought I'd ask the panel what they could point to as some of the unique ways that universities help foster New York City's entrepreneurial ecosystem that the general public might not be aware of. And I'm happy to. You can start with Jeff. We'll start with Eric.
So, when we look at the ecosystem in New York, we think about three essential pillars to building the ecosystem, and it's really about talent, infrastructure, and community. But talent is number one, and and that is talent to the founders of companies. That is the talent to managers. That's the talent for technical people, and so above all else, I think that access is or the development of talent is essential. The main point that I want to make on this is a number of years ago, we did a sort of what we call a game-changing exercise, and we interviewed hundreds of people in the community to determine what is the biggest thing that we could do in New York City to change the landscape from now and for the next 30 years. And what we heard resoundingly from all of the work that we did was that we needed to have a greater sense or increased amount of applied science in cooperation with the universities. And it became, abundantly clear, and maybe it should have been obvious, but that rose to the top of what everybody in the community was suggesting, which led to the applied science initiatives, the development of Cornell Technion, the expansion of Columbia and NYU Poly, and we'll actually be announcing more with respect to that. But it just gives you a sense of not just on our mind, but how important the role of universities are to developing the ecosystem in any community, let alone New York.
So I'll jump in, although we don't always have to go in order, I suppose. So primarily, universities do many things, but two of the most important are training students and providing the educational, education for them, and then the basic research that goes on, whether it's at a hospital, academic medical center, or within the research departments across the university. So my view tends to be, in the tech transfer office, my view tends to be focused on the researchers, just by the nature of the role. So what we do is when the faculty at the university or the graduate students come up with scientific inventions, tech transfer offices, and all the universities and medical centers in New York have one, evaluate those inventions for commercial potential and for patentability. We file patents on the inventions that come out, and then try to start companies based off of them, or find larger companies that will take them in and make them a home. So those two primary functions for the university both contribute to the local ecosystem. So in some ways, the research is a little bit less local. Some of those ideas, ideas are global. So they go off and they become part of larger corporations, and they get turned into products that change people's lives for the better for generations to come across the whole world. In some cases, if they're startups, they can be more local, and they can help the New York City community or the New York State in ways that can build jobs and taxes and exports and all the things that you want if you're a government official. The students are also, it's very important, because the students come to New York. Who doesn't like living in New York? It's a great place to be. And hopefully they graduate, and if they can find something interesting to do here, they stay. And what we're seeing, which is fascinating, is the number of students on campus who are becoming increasingly passionate about finding a way to have a career focused on entrepreneurship in New York City has exploded. And thankfully, so have the opportunities to have a career in entrepreneurship in the city. It's very, very exciting. Whether they're starting their own companies or joining many of the other opportunities that exist here. It's been great to see.
I agree with everything that's been said, and coming from the design side and art side, we're really focused on the culture and developing and making keeping the culture of the city vibrant and bringing in the people who are kind of taking kind of the edgy people who are kind of pushing the boundaries. And when we look at working with the research companies, like one of the projects that we did was working with a biomedical engineer up at Columbia, Sam Sia, to help him actually create a product from the research that he was doing that would work out in the field successfully. So while you have all of this research, the design comes in to actually turn it into usable product. And that, I think, is a really synergistic relationship between kind of what the universities are bringing into the environment.
Actually, just to jump in there, Sam's a really interesting case study too, because not only is he a faculty member at Columbia, and he formed a company when he was up at MIT, which then got sold recently. He's formed 2 companies since then. One is in the process of doing so now. He's also the person who founded Harlem Biospace, the incubator up near Columbia, to try and help the next generation of bioscience entrepreneurs. So he's sort of attacking this problem from all possible angles.
So, I think the interesting thing about universities is kind of the history in the United States, at least from the life sciences side, of funding. So up until 1930, there was no federal funding for basic research in the United States. And in 1930, the Ransdell's Act was passed, and it was the first time the federal government stepped in to fund. And the reason they did is that the private market was failing to fund basic research. We'd come out of the war, we're in the Depression, money wasn't available. And then as you went ahead in the post-World War II period, this social contract where the federal government provided resources for basic science, and in return the universities turned that information out to the public to be used, really was solidified. And then we got to 1980. And in 1980 there was this feeling that, boy, we're really falling behind economically, and so we changed the law. We passed the Bayh-Dole Act, which said that universities could now make money off that research that the federal government had funded. And what we've seen since 1980 then is a sea change in the orientation of universities toward the commercial realm. And if you actually read the Bayh-Dole Act, in the actual prescription in the act is that the act was designed to get universities to work with commercial entities. And so we want that. And so, the pure academic may say, I'm a pure academic and, I'm not going to get into that whole filthy money business. But the reality is we need it, and it's a continuum. And so in the life sciences, we need the federal funding to create the seed corn, the basic insights, which we then have to foster into products, drugs, devices that can help patients. And I think increasingly universities are realizing this is something that's not going to happen just randomly or by osmosis. We have to act with forethought. We have to create new programs. And so there are folks from NYU who are doing that. Columbia's doing that. Mount Sinai has made a big effort in this area. The design world has gotten more engaged with this. And so I think when people start to talk about that ecosystem, it's been a natural evolution actually over a fairly long period of time. And what we're witnessing now is kind of the coming together of these different threads. The administrations of the universities are realizing this is important because maybe those federal dollars aren't quite as available as they once were. The entrepreneurs are realizing that the talent and that the ideas are in the universities, and so they're coming to find what they can develop. And so I actually think that New York is in a particularly exciting period for this, with the efforts that the EDC has supported and with the activities of the universities as a group.
I think that coming together of the universities to share and leverage the resources that we all have and bring to the table is really kind of the critical thing that's happening now, and exciting to see happening.
So if we could pick up on, I think that's an excellent point. It was interesting. I was talking about the SBIC program for lending to students last night, and that was started in 1958 by President Eisenhower as a response to Sputnik, realizing that how are we going to get ahead in the space race? It's going to be investment in these kind of technologies. And I think not only for the professor in schools, I think schools also, another reason they're excited is when alums come back and give $100 million gifts, they realize we should have entrepreneurship programs.